Today, we're diving into a fascinating financial detective story. We're going to conduct a forensic analysis, almost like a financial autopsy, to figure out how a company went from looking pretty stable to being a total catastrophe in just 1 year. And this number, this is the smoking gun. This is the company's earnings for the year 2033, a loss of over $670,000. So the big question we have to answer today is, how on earth did they get here? And just look at the scale of this collapse. I mean, in 2032, the company had a small loss, sure, around 35 grand. Not great, but, manageable. But just 1 year later, that loss exploded by nearly 18 times. This wasn't a slow decline, folks. This was an absolute free fall. Okay, let's start our investigation. First, we need to understand the full extent of the damage. What does a financial crisis of this size really look like on paper? You see, that massive loss we just saw, that's really just the headline. To understand the full story, we have to look deeper at the company's vital signs. And right here, this table really tells the tale. This wasn't just a problem of spending too much money. Look at that revenue line. It was slashed by 60%. They went from bringing in over $3.5 million to just $1.4 million. This tells us the crisis started at the very top. People just stopped buying their stuff. And you can see that impact rippling across every single important metric. They sold almost 50% fewer units, their market share got cut by more than half, and here it is, the crucial clue. Perceived customer value, basically how customers rate their products, it crashed from a score of 40 all the way down to 16. Something happened that made customers completely lose faith in what this company was selling. All right, so we've seen the what, a complete collapse in sales and customer confidence. Now it's time for the why. We need to pull apart the decisions that the management team made during that year. So what choices were on the table for them? Let's start examining the primary suspects in our investigation, those day-to-day operational decisions about their products, their pricing, and where they put their money. Okay, here are the basics. The company sells 3 things: ties, scarves, and some really cheap socks. They decided on a uniform marketing budget for each one, and they invested a ton in R&D across the board, $250,000. Now, on the surface, this doesn't look totally crazy, right? But the devil, as they say, is in the details. And here we go. This is a huge piece of evidence. The management team chose to go with a low-cost supplier. Now, think back to that slide we just saw. Remember how perceived customer value completely cratered? Well, this choice is almost certainly the culprit. You just can't cut corners on quality and expect customers not to notice. They were spending a fortune on R&D, but then completely undermining it with cheap, shoddy materials. But it wasn't just about the day-to-day stuff. Management also had to make a series of big, one-time investment decisions. These were the moments that could have changed everything, for better or, as it turns out, for worse. And these weren't just about budget lines. They were about the company's whole strategy. Were they going to focus on fixing today's problems or preventing tomorrow's risks or maybe seizing brand new opportunities? Let's see what was on their plate. First up, a real operational nightmare. The warehouse was a total mess. 10% of all orders had errors. That kind of thing makes customers furious and drives them away. The solution on the table was a $125,000 investment in automation. This was a clear and present problem that needed fixing. Next, a major risk was looming. An inspector found serious issues with the factory roof. Now, it wasn't a problem right now, but if a hurricane hit, it could be absolutely catastrophic. The fix was pricey, $320,000. And this is a classic business dilemma, right? Do you spend a ton of money to prevent a disaster that might never even happen? Then there was this huge opportunity. They could invest $345,000 in brand new machinery that promised to cut their production costs by up to 25%. I mean, that's a game changer. It could have massively improved their profits, especially on those lower-priced items. And the list just keeps going. They could invest in energy efficiency, improve the factory for their workers, add new tech to their products, or even raise $300,000 by issuing new stock. The key thing to realize here is that management had a limited amount of cash and a very long list of things they could do with it. So we've seen the daily decisions, and we've seen the major investment choices they were facing. Now, let's connect the dots and figure out what really caused this financial disaster. And this, right here, is probably the most important lesson from this whole story. There wasn't one single fatal flaw. It wasn't just the cheap supplier or one bad investment. The failure was systemic. It was the result of a whole series of interconnected decisions that just compounded on each other over time. So, how could they have avoided all this? Well, this three-step framework might have helped. First, you have to actually connect the dots in your data. They should have seen that choosing a low-cost supplier was directly linked to their customer value score falling through the floor. Second, they needed to be way more strategic about their big investments, balancing today's problems against tomorrow's risks and opportunities. And finally, they needed to see the business as one big system, where a decision you make over here is going to affect everything over there. So, when you boil it all down, this is the central takeaway. That seemingly small operational choice of a cheap supplier, that was the first domino to fall. It destroyed customer value. That loss of value, well, it absolutely killed their sales. And that collapse in sales is what created the massive financial hole we started with. Everything was connected. And so we arrive at our verdict. This wasn't just a story about bad numbers. It's a powerful lesson in business strategy. It's about how critical it is to understand how every single decision, big or small, adds up to the final result. Which leaves us with one final thought. Imagine you're brought in to turn this company around. You're looking at these financials, these metrics, and this list of choices. What's the very first thing you would do to stop the bleeding and start the recovery? It's a tough problem, and there's definitely no easy answer.